All right, welcome. It's good to see you guys. It's great to be with you. Tony DeLellis and I are going to talk today about APEST. And we'll do a little bit of an introduction first on APEST, but we want to spend a bit of time not just doing the basics, but talking through some stuff that we've noticed and observed that might be helpful if you're trying to flesh this stuff out and live it out in your local context. So hopefully after the introductory part, there will be some really good nuggets as you're trying to apply. Tony and I have been friends for how long, Tony? It's been 20 years?
Yeah.
Been friends for about 20 years. Tony started the brewery, distillery, coffee house. It's all three. First one in PA, right? That was all three?
Yeah.
Yep, first location in Pennsylvania that was brewery, distillery, and coffee shop. And you've got what, 5 locations now? So as you can tell, he's apostolic entrepreneur, multiplying breweries, but also multiplying micro churches and helping develop leaders and elders, part of our movement, help to start a church. So has been an unbelievable friend to me. And APEST is a huge part of our culture and empowering every single person in their calling and gifting and helping people to fly and soar and be unleashed. So I'll give you a little bit of a backdrop if you're not familiar with APEST. If you open up to Ephesians Chapter 4 and read in Ephesians Chapter 4 the description of, to each and every one of us are given these gifts: apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers, so that the church will be built up. And if you want to get like a little bit of an idea on the context of that passage, Ephesians is written to men, women, children, slaves, read aloud to everyone. And the language is to each and every one of us are given these gifts, or really it's the word for calling. And I think at the core of it, we all are made in the image of God. We're children of the Father, made in the image of God. And we happen to look more like our dad in different ways. And we happen to have different strengths and weaknesses. You go, oh my goodness, you remind me of your dad, because you do X, Y, Z, whatever. And so there are certain characteristics, gifts. Tony and I are actually wired pretty similar in our number 1 gifting, which is apostolic. But in our second gifting, Tony, what are you, teacher?
I'm actually teacher first, apostle second. Yeah.
So Tony's teacher, apostle, and mine is apostle, prophet, evangelist would be my order in terms of gifting. And so we really connect around creating and starting things. To give you an idea of what each of these giftings are, the word for calling, you've got apostle, it comes from the Greek word apostello, which means sent, sending. It's a missionary gift, multiplication. How do we start new things, multiply new communities, reach new people, impact the region, the nation, the world? And you've got the prophetic gifting, and the prophets are calling us back to faithfulness. Are we doing what God has called us to do? Are we being faithful to Scripture? Are we being faithful to the heart and passions of God? Not only are we doing the right things, but are we doing them for the right reasons? So the prophet's also calling us to care not just for people that we feel comfortable with, but are we going to the poor, the outcasts, marginalized, orphans, widows? So you've got your apostle, your multiplier, your prophet, who's calling us back to faithfulness, to the heart of God, the motivations of God. And you've got your evangelist, which is your good news person. Literally sharing with people good news, but bringing other people that are outsiders and treating them as insiders, bringing them around the table and sharing good news with them. So you've got your good news person, your recruiter, your inviter, your hospitable people. And then you've got your shepherds, who are your caretakers, your people that are listening, that are empathetic, that are meeting the needs of the people around them, making sure that everybody's cared for, listened to. Then you've got your teachers, who are your storytellers, who are explaining the truths of God in ways that everybody can understand. Really putting the cookies on the bottom shelf, sitting around fire pits and even in arenas and everything in between, and explaining the truths of God to the people around them in ways that make sense. So you've got all these callings, and the beautiful thing is you see them both within our faith communities, but you also see them in the world, right? In Tony, you can see his apostolic gifting and what he does as an entrepreneur, but you see teachers that are teaching, and nurses that are shepherding, and CrossFit people that are recruiting. You got all the above. So
Prophets that are
prophets standing up
standing
against
up against, yeah.
injustice and trafficking and everything else. So yeah, you see these things at play in the world. So I'm going to start with just some practical things after giving you that backdrop. Tony and I had a lot of sort of bullet points or chicken scratches that we wanted to put down, that we thought, what are some things we want to talk about that aren't just explaining what the gifts are, but as we've been trying to live this out in a place for the past decade, what are some things that we've noticed? I'm going to tell you this. I think it's really critical that your people know how they're gifted. And so you could preach on it, teach on it, whatever, but I think at the end of the day, you want all of your people to know what their callings are. So I can't take for granted that you're not going to pass it on to your whole community. And so step one is have everybody take a test. Have everybody identify within whatever community, micro church, missional community, small group, house church, parish church, whatever. Have everybody identify what is your calling. I think it's really crazy that very few people actually know what their calling or gifting is, and that people can sit in churches or small groups or house churches or whatever for decades upon decades and not even know what their calling or gifting is. You go, all right, if we're trying to win a game, if we're trying to move the ball down the field as an offense, but you don't know whether you're a quarterback or a wide receiver or an offensive lineman, how are we supposed to work together to be effective? Even if you know what your calling is, it doesn't mean that you're good at it. You still have to be developed in it. But we've got a so-called army of people, and the army of God, the people of God that are called out on the mission of God to bring good news into the world, that don't even frankly know what their calling or gifting is. So I think step one, would you agree with that, Tony? Step one would be people just need to know what their calling or gifting is.
And I would take it a step further and say, don't leave it up for chance. Don't say, hey, here's the website, here's whatever, go take your test, let me know how it goes. Like with our micro churches, we are active in taking it even so far as paying for each individual test and collecting the results and removing any barrier that might stand in the way of somebody finding out what their true gifting is. Because what we found when we did it with our micro church on multiple occasions is that people don't actually know. They have a hunch, they have an inclination. And this especially goes for, and we'll get into this later, goes for the gifts that are less frequent, that show up not as frequently. People don't realize that they have it. And it's, I don't know about you, Mike, but it's been incredible to sit in those circles and watch people get these results. And there are tears that flow going, man, I just thought I was different. I just thought I was, not fit for evangelism. I was not fit for whatever. And to find out that they have a prophetic gifting or a teaching gift and watch like the barriers just be removed from them. Mm-hmm. It's incredible to see. It almost gives them permission to go, man, I don't have to be just like Mike.
Mhm.
I don't have to be just like Christina. I can be who God created me to be.
Mhm.
So I would say remove any barrier in the way, whether it's financial, time, sit with them and watch them take the test and make sure it happens, because it unleashes their understanding of who God created them to be, and gives them permission to utilize that gift for sure.
Yeah, and we've had a number of our micro churches, they all take it together.
Yeah.
As a group. And then they have created these Excel sheets where everybody's callings or gifts are all mapped out. You're number one in shepherd, you're number two in prophet, you're number one in apostle, you're number two in evangelist. And they just map all this out. And so as they're strategizing, we want to start something new. We got to get the apostles to weigh in and like help us think about creating something new and forming something new and architecting, or so-and-so's hurting. Well, turns out we've got 6 shepherds that are a part of this community. So, who is free and available to listen this week? Who could drop off a meal? Who could be there for support? And so you've got an entire team of people to pull from. You got a whole army of people to work with. And so rather than the typical one person trying to do everything, which what does that lead to? Burnout, right? Imagine if you're trying to lead a church, house church, micro church, small church, whatever it is, and you feel like you have to both set vision for people, plan how you're going to bless and change the neighborhood, figure out how you're going to reach people, host the event, put together some sort of teaching, sit around and pray together, and also take some time in confession or communion. If you got to do all that, how long are you going to last before you just completely burn out?
And you're not going to do it well.
Yep.
You're not going to do it.
But then you realize, wait, we've got some people that are evangelistic, and part of how the Holy Spirit works through these evangelistic people is that they love to show hospitality. And I think that's where the other gifts that are mentioned in scripture, gifts of the Spirit, such as discernment and hospitality, they work like tools in the tool belt, right? So how do we create environments with people that are good news environments? Well, hospitality is one way that the Holy Spirit empowers us. The hospitality is like the hammer in the tool belt of evangelism that empowers us to be able to live into our calling more effectively. So you watch people really flourish when you look around the room and go, all right, the teacher doesn't have to also be the host. The evangelist can be the host, and the teacher can teach. And then as we gather together and we're thinking about forming another community as we're experiencing some growth, the apostle is going to help us strategize how to form something new. And so you're getting everybody at play rather than one person getting really spread thin trying to do everything. Really critical. So the next thing that I think is really critical is seeing your role, my role, all of our roles. When you pull a group of people together, more than anything, it's not being a leader over people, but a servant under people, empowering people as like a facilitator or a point guard or a conductor. Really, when you walk into an environment, you're thinking, how do I get everybody active? How do we make sure the ball gets in everybody's hands? How do we make sure that every person has an opportunity to operate in their callings and passions? Now, rather than me feeling like I've got to do everything and go through some big agenda, I'm going, all right, Tony, could you help us strategize this? Hey, we've got this opportunity in the community. What are some things you've noticed? And then I'm calling out another person who's more prophetic to speak into that, right? So I see my role through the course of the night. Tony, you just said this. You gathered your group, what, last night?
Yeah, last night we've been going through The Chosen, and watching together as a small microchurch. And then discussing and activating gifts. And hey, what did we see Jesus do? How did he interact with people in this episode? And how do we implement that over the next week in our lives? And they get homework, and they get everybody participates in that conversation based on their gifting. And it literally is as detailed as, hey, I'm going to talk to the shepherds now. And what does this mean? Lauren, what does this mean? Marlena, when we talk about the shepherds, and how do we take the context of what we just learned together and implement that in our lives? And so by activating all the different gifts and giving all the different gifts a voice, you start to see actual mission taking place on a daily basis throughout the week, rather than just like trying to cram it all into some hour-long thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the activation that matters, the implementation that matters.
Yeah, and so Tony's always thinking, I'm always thinking about how to get everyone involved. So his micro church is hosting a larger gathering that any of our micro churches can come to. Every week, a different micro church hosts a larger gathering to highlight what's happening across our movement. This upcoming Sunday happens to be Tony's micro church. Why don't you describe what's going on, who's doing what?
Yeah, so so our group will be responsible for the hospitality portion in terms of like providing a breakfast, having that ready to go. And then my wife and 2 other people from our microchurch will be doing the worship, which is not always necessary. We don't always have worship on a Sunday morning, but
Meaning music. We always have worship, not always music.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yep.
Traditional worship. But they're gonna play and use their musical gifts. And then my wife is going to teach alongside Mike and use her teaching gift
Mm-hmm.
to talk about something, a subject that she's passionate about, and it's something they discussed ahead of time. And it was fun last night. We even prayed over that and had everybody encourage Lauren on like, here's some topics that, we think would be great to cover. So there was collaboration there,
Mm-hmm.
using everybody's voice, even in Lauren teaching. John, a young man from our group, will be leading communion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll just do like a brief synopsis on, hey, here's what's going on in our group. Here's some ideas of what we've been doing around, around the chosen, around brunches, around poker nights, around things like that. And so the whole thing is designed to take all these individual micro churches, gather them together, tell stories, learn from one another, encourage one another, and then go out and throughout the week execute the things that we've talked about. We pack a lot into a Sunday that I never got to see growing up in my, traditional United Methodist church. It's different. There's more voices, more activation, but it takes conscious forethought ahead of time and strategizing to go, how am I going to activate all these things? And how am I going to use and encourage everybody's individual gift to be used in that arena? And it doesn't have to be a Sunday morning. It's whatever arena we're talking about.
Well, and that's critical to the conversation here, is you can't do everything on a Sunday.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about activating every person, different environments, all of our communities use at least 3 distinct environments. The first being a party/serve environment, where we realize everyone in our lives, whether they share a faith or not, they'll party with us and they'll serve with us. They'll run a 5K for a cause and they'll come to a barbecue. We realize everybody will do that. And then we've got an environment where we say, how do we really understand our faith, activate everyone in our gifting, pray together, take communion together, live into rhythms together as a community. So that's a more what we call VIP environment, which is very intentional people, not important. Everybody's important, right? Very intentional environment for shaping and formation. But then between that, you're not going to go from a party into that very intentional environment. We create spaces where people can dip their feet in and be curious. Now, and that could be like Tony gathering some people here at the pub to talk about faith questions over a beer. And it's just allowing people to go from serving with us one night to asking questions around a table at a pub. And then eventually they end up in that environment where they could go really deep in their faith later on. Now, the beauty of it is There are people who get really excited about different environments because of their APEST callings, right? You've got certain people that get really excited about environments where we could serve and do things in this place, in this neighborhood, in this brewery that are going to make this place better, that we're going to care for people that are hurting because they're prophets or because they're evangelists. And then maybe you've got shepherds and teachers in that VIP environment that are really loving the fact that we can slow down with the truths of God, care for each other as a community, pray for each other, be there to support each other. But you really need to play with a variety of environments as the family of God, rather than limit it to one environment, right? It's all of life. And you're seeing that.
Yeah, I think what happens when we try to limit it to a Sunday, because we've done that, we've tried to cram it all in, is you end up accidentally valuing certain gifts over another, specifically like the shepherd teacher in a traditional Sunday morning environment. And when we broke free of that and realized that there were actually 6 other days in the week that we could activate people's gifting, it took the evangelists, instead of saying like, hey, the extent of your service to God is shaking people's hands as they walk in the door as a greeter, and saying, no, there's more to your gift than that. And it's valuable and it's important and we need it as a community. Everything changed. Like I said earlier, people's eyes lit up with understanding of, man, like there's a place for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's helpful too, as people start to understand their callings, that we see that that's all of life. It's all of life in a way of we're helping people even figure out their careers attached to their APEST callings. Because the APEST calling isn't just this is what you do in the church. It's this is how God has made you in his image. And so maybe if you're apostolic, you're not going to be happy working that job where someone else tells you to do. Maybe you need to start a business because you're a creator, somebody that wants to start and form something new. Or maybe if you're prophetic, you need to be involved in something that's changing your city because that aligns with your passions. And maybe God has called you to be in that place, creating change in your city, in your community, because you're a prophet. It's not just something you do in church. It's part of how you're made in the image of God. So we're connecting these callings, not just to stuff that's done within the walls of a church building, but it's all of life. And I think that's a critical part of thinking about APEST too, that it's not just inside the church, but it's also outside of your church community, all of the gifts. Because we've got this weird misconception that shepherding is something that's done inside the church. Well, that's part of it, but you can also shepherd your neighbors. You can also shepherd your coworkers. You can also shepherd people in your city that are hurting. So what does it look like to help people who are called to be shepherds, to be both shepherds of their own faith community and faith family, but also missional shepherds that are called by God to love and care for the people around them and say, however I care for the least of these is how I care for Jesus. And so it's a real identity issue for me.
Every gift equals mission. That's
Yep.
what we've learned. And we didn't understand that at first, but we have learned that every gift is the same. It's synonymous with mission. It's just, it might look a little different for each individual, depending on not only their primary gift, but how their secondary and tertiary gifts impact that primary gift.
Yep.
It's this beautiful kaleidoscope that happens as we see these people out interacting in the community. And again, not just within the faith community,
Yep.
but out in their career, in their hobbies, in their kids' sports team, their coaching, in all these different arenas, in the PTO at school. It's a different flavor that happens when these people who are activated in their gifting show up in any arena.
Yeah.
And it makes it better.
Think about it, for example, with the prophetic gifting. Have you seen that at use within a faith community? Yes. You've seen the prophets that are calling us back to faithfulness, that are sharing words of encouragement with other believers and lifting them up and building them up and praying and listening for them on behalf of God, right? But then you also have prophets that are thinking in terms of mission. How has God called us to be faithful in this community or city or workplace? And what might God want to change so that we see God's kingdom come in this brewery as it is in heaven, right? And so prophets are not just within a faith community, but also outside. So it works like that, like Tony said, for every one of the giftings.
And I think the key is blurring the lines there and
Mhm.
understanding that there is no separation between your faith community
Yep.
and your actual community. Like it's
There's
getting to the point where you break down that wall.
no sacred secular
Right.
divide, for sure. Yep. There is no sacred secular divide. And I think, so another thing that we've learned is apostles. If you have an apostolic gifting, if you're a part of Creo, there's a chance that you might have some of that in you as someone who's creating and starting and multiplying and wanting to impact your region. And, so if you have that in you, we have learned, and Tony and I can feel it when we get together because we both have this. Apostles should not stay in the same place very long. And so with your apostolic gifting, when you start something, you need to start with an end date. That's a suggestion. You start a community, a house church, a micro church, a new initiative, a nonprofit. You start with an end date to work yourself out of there, not meaning the thing's going to dissolve, but you're going to pass it off to someone else, because part of your apostolic gifting is that you're going to form new things. You're going to go to new places. You're going to start new groups and new communities. And we found that we'll get together and go, I'm feeling bored. How about you, Tony? And it's part of that apostolic itch that God's calling us to do something else. And so if we don't from the get-go put anticipation in the hearts and minds of the people that we're walking with, that I'm going to be with you for the next year and a half. And in that year and a half, we're going to spend a lot of time together, eat a lot of meals together, strategize a lot of ways where we can make a difference. We're going to do stuff in this neighborhood or community, but eventually I'm going to leave. And remember, just like Jesus said, it'll be better when I go. If it was true of Jesus, it's way more true of us, that it's going to be better when we go.
People
right?
can't wait for us to
They're
go.
like, see ya.
No, just kidding.
But it's good because our goal all along, right? When you have an expectation that my daughter in 4 years is going to be out of the house at 18, right? When you have that expectation, there are certain things you have to do to prepare yourselves. There are certain things that you have to do to prepare your community. There are certain things they have to know. There are ways that you have to develop them. So it keeps focus to what you're doing. It keeps you intentional about what you're doing. So if you're apostolically gifted, or even if you're not, but you're thinking about the people that are part of your movement or network that are apostolically gifted, you want to think about an end date, and you want to think about the fact that they can't be in the same spot for a long time.
Yeah, it creates a sense of urgency. And it also creates a sense of release for somebody with an apostolic gift. Like, we have found ourselves over the years when we feel locked into a certain place, right? A certain group. You almost run the risk of feeling resentment toward that group if they don't step up and somebody take over when you're ready for them to. Whereas if you start with that end date in mind, it just becomes the expectation. Everybody knows. And yeah, we found that it definitely creates urgency, and it also limits resentment when it comes to, hey, I want to start something new.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And you're giving them baby steps in between. You're going to teach tonight.
Yeah.
None of us
tonight.
are gathering this
Yeah.
week because you're going to invite a neighbor over.
Right.
We're going to come back next week and talk about how it went.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're moving people toward maturity, right? With the goal of, I'm going to leave, but we're going to become a better movement for it. Another piece of the pie here is learning that I think it's critical to lean into our differences. Critical. So something that we used to do, and I think there's a bit of arrogance or cockiness or pride that can be attached to it, that you go, well, I'm no shepherd, right? And I've done this where I'm like, I'm not really a shepherd. That's not really my gifting. And so therefore, I don't need to show compassion.
Right.
or love people that are hurting. That is so un-Jesus like. All right. I'm just going to call it what it is. That is very un-Jesus like. The goal is that we lean into our differences, understanding that people that are stronger in different areas are going to help us become more like Jesus, because Jesus was an unbelievable apostolic leader. He started the movement, right, that changed the world. Jesus was the perfect prophet and evangelist and shepherd and teacher. He was the great teacher, the great rabbi. So in the same way, we're learning from each other. At the end of the day, if I'm a terrible shepherd, which I am, by the way, I got a 5 in shepherding in my test,
He's right.
50 in apostolic. I know that. But the goal isn't for me to go, well, I'm not a shepherd. It's for me to learn. Hey, shepherds, teach me how to be more empathetic, how to be a better listener, how to be more present. And the goal is that maybe I move my 5 to a 10. Maybe I start to show some improvement in that area, because to become more of a shepherd means that I'm becoming more like Jesus. And if you have nothing apostolic in you, to become a little more apostolic is to become a little more like Jesus. And so we're learning from each other what it looks like to be more like Jesus, because we have this tendency to just hang on to our gifting and not learn from each other how to grow in maturity in every way into Christ.
Yeah, we used to almost take the attitude that you had this bank of numbers, right? And it was like a limited bank. And so if I'm a 5 in shepherding and I'm a 43 in apostolic, then if I take my shepherding from a 5 to a 10, then all of a sudden my apostle must drop 5 points as well. And it doesn't work like that. Your primary giftings are always going to be strong. That's who God created you to be. But that doesn't mean that you don't work on those other areas and learn from each other. Not only do you become more like Jesus and better at those things, even if it's just incrementally, the other thing that happens is it creates in your mind a value for the gifts that aren't yours. And so by going from a 5 to a 10 as a shepherd, Mike all of a sudden has more understanding and more respect for that gift, a bit more value, even subconsciously, of that shepherding gift where he might not have had it before. And that's become huge for us in understanding how we interact with each other, because there was a time where the shepherds in my group, I just didn't get along with them well. Like I couldn't think like that. It didn't make sense to me. But as I became more in tune to that gift, we actually became closer. And I started to understand that, man, like they're not against me. Like even for conflict resolution, once I started to understand how a shepherd thought, I went, oh, they're not doing that to me. That's just how they think, right? And so it actually happens more the other way, where people start to understand how cold we can be as apostles and or as prophets. And they start to understand, like, Mike didn't forget my birthday because he doesn't care about me. It's just like his brain doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah, Reese used to always say to me when I text him in the morning with some sort of goal or objective that we had, hey, are we going to do this? Did you start this? What are we good for Tuesday at 4:00 with that group of people? And he would respond to me by going, good morning. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot to say good morning. And so he's teaching me how to actually pause and care and show concern for somebody's day. And, you know, I've maybe improved by 1% on that. I don't know. But I think that's very helpful and healthy for us to process. I'm going to say this too. Another observation is that I think there's an uneven distribution of the giftings, meaning I do not think that 20% of human beings are apostolic, 20% are evangelistic, 20% are shepherds. I think that there are an unusual high amount of shepherds and even more prophets than I thought. Not nearly as many apostolic types. I don't know that you can have that many people starting new things, right? However, if you've got a lot of people that are coming around the table and new people coming to faith and communities that are forming, what do you have? You got a lot of hurting people. If you have a lot of hurting people, a lot of people that are going through physical issues and ailments, emotional pain, spiritual trauma, like, baggage from their past church hurt or whatever else they're going through. You need a lot of shepherds that are going to care for a lot of people, both inside your community and outside your community. And traditionally, when you only think of a shepherd as a paid leader of a church, and you've got one person that's supposed to shepherd 200 people, and you go, you can't even have lunch with 200 people in a year. So how are you going to shepherd 200 people well? You're not. But what if you've got a community of people, 10, 20, 30 people, and let's say out of a community of 20 people, 10 of the 20 are shepherds. Now you've got like one shepherd caring for every 2 people. Nobody gets burnout. There's a high ratio of care, support, listening, and those people are also able to listen and care for the needs of the people that you're on mission to. I think by design, you're going to find as people take the test, wait, we got a lot of, some of you have already told me this, and we got a lot of shepherds. We even have a lot of teachers in here too. And so you find like a uneven distribution of the giftings. It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's probably, I can think of across our 18 micro churches, and then I think Jay and what he's doing in Philly, and Christian and Keith, I think we probably have 7 apostolic, like their first primary gifting is apostolic. Not that many people. We have a few of them. I'm going to also make just a couple more points, and I'm going to open up Q&A. One is if you look at, for example, a party, right? This is real tangible. Every single person in the gifting is necessary at the party. Meaning people tend to think that a party is an environment for evangelist, right? The evangelist is connecting with lost people and it's a party, but you need shepherds because people that come into the party are hurting and need listened to, and there needs to be someone that's present, that's with them. You need the prophets that are going. There are certain people that aren't invited. There are people in this community or in this workplace that weren't brought into this party that always get left out of the parties, and they need to be here. And so when you understand every gifting or every calling is necessary for parties, but also for your VIP kind of environments, your very intentional environments for shaping people in the faith. Because even Bible studies, I find there are so many layers to every text that we read, because everybody reads scripture through the lens of their APEST calling. Meaning every time I read a passage, Mike Gerald's seeing movement in it. Why do you always preach about or talk about movement, Mike? Well, it's because I see it everywhere. I see it all over the pages of scripture. Why? Because it's there. It is there, right? And then a shepherd is always seeing love and caring for people, and really being present with the people that we're called to. Why? Because it's there, right? It's always there. Good news, always there. And so I think there are these deeper layers brought into it when we understand each of those environments need every single person active in every environment, because they all matter and their voices always matter. I think we should open up Q&A now. So I'm going to thank everyone for coming. I got more points, but we're at 45 minutes and I want you guys to be able to dialogue with us. So thank you for tuning in. All those of you that are watching later. I'm going to stop the recording.